Jenna McHugh, HR professional, and BPG alum, as we said, who also has a great, great, I don't know if I call it a hobby or second career, so to speak. I'll let her talk about that a little bit too. But she now, after her certification and so forth, she was in HR previously, and now is Vice President of HR at SureSeal. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna and let her take it from there. We're going to go through a presentation here on again, as it says, how do you engage with companies during your job search? So Jenna, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, Tassos. And Marcelina, I actually just shared my screen, so I can go ahead and navigate the screens now.
Okay, fantastic.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate the time you took. Now, this presentation and what I'm about to say is all about you and all for you. So I've definitely left time at the end of this to ask questions where I think that might be really, really valuable. So anything I don't cover that you really want to know about, anything HR related, it can be recruiting related or any other topic HR related, I would be happy to answer. So I really focus this on interviewing, recruiting, networking. And so what I'd like to start off by doing is asking each one of you, how many of you right now are working? If you could just say I. Okay, and how many of you are not working? Say I.
Aye.
Okay, so all of you are right now in transition. Did I hear anyone that said they are employed right now?
I'm employed. I was muted.
Okay, great. So great. So hopefully all of you will find this beneficial, and what it is really about is winning them over. And it can be hard in our world today, especially with a lot of people who are in transition, a lot of people who are looking for roles, and how do you stand out among others? So, all right. So here's what we're going to do. Here's the agenda I've got. I've got an introduction. I'm going to talk a little about some essential basics that you've got to make sure you've got covered before you even kind of launch into that networking and interview. And then talking a bit about networking, some tips. I actually drew upon my own experience too. So I was in transition 2 years ago when I worked for a company that moved my role to New York, and I was unemployed for about 9 to 10 months. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I found worked for me and how I landed the job, and then also just what I know now from being in human resources and that experience as well. And then lastly, once you do land the interview, some tips with that. I'm going to be sharing with you some real life examples of things I have seen recently. We are doing recruiting right now and recruiting for some very senior level roles. And there's definitely some tips I can share and some things to make sure that you are doing to put yourself ahead of others. And then lastly, again, questions. So a little bit about me and my background. So again, Jenna McHugh, I am the Vice President of SureSeal. We are a 240-person manufacturing firm on the west side of Cincinnati. We create seals. So the three primary industries that we are in is lighting, HVAC, like furnaces, and medical devices. So if you're driving down the highway and you see those big overhead lights, there's actually a seal in there that's holding all of those components together and also keeping out the rain and all the elements. So those are the type of products that we create. We are private equity owned, and we are in a huge growth mode right now too. So we anticipate that we're going to about quadruple our size in the next 5 to 7 years through acquisitions and also through organic growth too. So keep our lookout and keep my name when it comes to opportunities and positions that we have open. A little bit more, I've got 15 years of experience in human resources, about 6 years of experience in operations. as well too, and then 3 years of experience with corporate philanthropy. I did work for Macy's, so large Fortune 200 company for about 21 years, and now I work for a small company. I will share with you that skills are transferable. So I am very much an advocate of, you don't need to have experience in a particular industry or with a particular customer in order to be successful. Now that might not apply to every single position and every single role, but for the most part, very much an advocate of skills over years of experience. Again, I did also graduate from the Business Performance Group, being my Lean Six Sigma Black Belt in 2018. I'm also a wife, a mother of 3, and I'm a marathon runner too, which is what Tassos and I were just chatting about. I do share my running experiences on social media, which has turned into kind of a hobby of its own, sharing pictures and sharing my life as a runner. So a little more about me.
Jenna, can I stop you 1 second? Can everyone see the screen? Because some of us, for example, I'm on the agenda page.
Oh, you are? Huh.
That's what I'm seeing here.
The agenda, you know.
Marcy, are you still sharing your screen, or?
Looks like it. Here, I just
there
stopped
we go.
it.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good. So can you guys see this where it says nice to meet you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please stop me throughout. I do want to keep this informal too. So yep, thanks for that, Tassos.
Sure.
All right. So moving along with the essentials. So here are some things when it comes to starting off, that you've got to make sure your house is cleaned up before you start launching into a lot of conversations and interviews, etc. One I've got is Google yourself. So if you've not already done that, you know, you are getting ready to walk out there to meet a lot of people you maybe already have, start this interview process, you've got to have your very best foot forward with every single one of those conversations. And I will tell you, as a recruiter, somebody in human resources, we do social media checks. So Google yourself and see what pops up. And what you want to make sure is that your Facebook page, you know, I recommend you set it to private, but any photos that are public are ones that you would want your mother and a future employer to see. And also along with this too, especially when it comes to LinkedIn. And a big thing with LinkedIn, I'm guessing everyone here probably has a LinkedIn profile, but some of the things that I have seen specifically are that you have to make sure your LinkedIn profile matches your resume. I had a recent situation, a very a senior level position that we were recruiting for, and when we started really digging and going through the interview process, found that dates on the resume didn't match up with dates on the LinkedIn profile, titles didn't match up, accomplishments when it came to numbers didn't match up. And that's really important, because what it tells a recruiter, if they don't, is that you don't have good attention to detail. We question, you know, what is the real truth here? Why don't these line up? And it's important that you have a clean, clear story. So make sure the two of those match. If you have left a company, update that on LinkedIn. I've got several examples of individuals who it still says present. You know how you can select in your last job, I was here from this date to that date. If you have left a job, don't hide it. Because in our mind, from a recruiter standpoint, if you do, it shows a lack of transparency. It shows that it shows, you know, what, you know, why are you not saying that you've left an employer? Why are you basically saying that you are still at an employer if you truly are not with that company? We, in fact, I know have somebody at our company that is still showing they were employed and they left us a year ago. So what is much better is put the date that you ended that. The month and year is fine. Some people even just put the year, which I think is fine too. Recruiters understand, especially in this environment with COVID, that a lot of people have been let go. more and more and more companies, unfortunately, very different than maybe 50, 75 years ago, or even less than that, probably 25 years ago, you know, there weren't a whole lot of layoffs. It's much more commonplace these days. And recruiters also know that top performers and very talented people are a part of that and are let go. So I really take it with a grain of salt. If somebody says, you know, they were let go, reduction in force, to me, it is much more about how they respond and how they communicate that. And so what's important that you do is you show that, yes, I left X company in April, and I'm really excited about my path forward and these skills that I have to offer your company. So be prepared to explain your accomplishments on your resume. So we know that what's really important is that you use quantifiable numbers as much as possible. So if you say you grew sales by this much, you increased productivity by this much, you saved X amount in expenses. Numbers are very powerful on the resume. But also be prepared to explain exactly how you did this. I have recent examples of this as well too. You know, it's easy in maybe that first interview to be able to share some of the numbers and talk about your accomplishments, but typically for many positions, it's going to involve multiple interviews. And with each one of those interviews, you're going to be expected to go into a little bit more depth, more explanation on how you achieved those accomplishments. So you've got to make sure if you said you grew sales by 10%, know exactly how you did that and know exactly your role in that. They can't be ambiguous. So know the math. And then the last one is, I say, you know, use the CAR technique. Now I'm going to use the caveat here. There's also the STAR technique. There's the SMASH technique. There's a whole bunch of acronyms for different techniques you can use. But I think the premise is the exact same. Make sure for each question you tell a story and you tell it succinctly. So that is the context, the background and situation, what the issue was, what the problem was, the actions that you took, very specifically, what actions did you take, and then always end with what your results were. My favorite happens to be CAR, because it's only 3 letters and it's really simple and easy to remember. One thing that I did when I was in transition that I found most valuable was I actually it probably took me about half a day, but I literally just came up with all of my stories. I just wrote out a bunch of CARs, a bunch of contact action results of the most powerful stories that I had in my professional life. And what I was able to do then is I chunked those into different topics of, this is a leadership example, this is a change management example, etc. And so I was able to really review those, so I could just rattle them off my tongue when it came to examples when I was being asked. All right, moving on to networking. So I'm guessing your networking might look a bit more like this. You know, instead of standing in a room with people, it's probably a little bit more, this is intended to be like a Zoom screen here with with 9 boxes and meeting people across the screen. So one thing, networking connections are still most important. So I know that's probably something you've heard before, but I'm telling you this from an HR standpoint too. So right now, when you think of when you recruit or when you apply for a job, you are probably submitting your application, and hundreds of others most likely are also submitting their resume, their application for the exact same job. So how do you stand out? I will tell you right now that every single job you apply for, I recommend finding a common connection or somebody that works at that company that can advocate for you. Shoot a note to HR, shoot a note to the recruiter and say, hey, would you be willing to look at this person? Even if you haven't worked with them before, they can still say, hey, you know, I know this person's character and it's, you know, top notch. But I will tell you, the first candidates we look for are the ones that come from our own internal employee referrals. So we almost always speak with somebody who has been recommended from somebody inside of the company, whether they knew them professionally or personally, or were just passed along from them. So, so highly important. When you're networking, if you do not know someone, so if it is more of a blind connection, or a connection of somebody that you do not know very well, one thing that I found successful was to ask for 15 minutes. This actually came from a book. I think it's the 15-minute network or something like that. But I asked for 15 minutes of their time and then stick with it, because most people can find 15 minutes. If you say, oh, you know, can we set up a meeting, and then you schedule for an hour, that is daunting. And, you know, remember that when you are asking to network with somebody, they're doing you a favor. And if you don't know them, they're doing a favor for a stranger, or someone who's, you know, an indirect stranger. So asking for 15 minutes, and then make sure you stick with it. Don't, you know, be very cognizant of that time. And as you're approaching 10 minutes, you know, say, hey, I know we've only got 5 more minutes, and make sure you wrap it up. Always do your research on the person prior to meeting them. Ask for a common interest point. So study their LinkedIn profile, memorize it, Google them, and find something that you can break the ice with. For example, you graduated from the same school. Maybe you're in the same group. Maybe there's this similar business professional group. Someone that you know in common. Read an article. So if they write blog posts, or if they put posts out on LinkedIn, read it and find something interesting that you can break the ice with at the beginning. And always make sure to ask, when you end a networking conversation, 100% of the time, ask if there's somebody else that they can introduce you to. Ask specifically as well, not just, is there anyone else you can connect me with? Because every single person knows hundreds of people, right? So you're putting the work on them if you just leave it as open-ended as that. Be very specific and say, you know, is there somebody that you can introduce me to at X company? Or do you know, I noticed that you are connected with Chris and Susan at X company. Would you be willing to facilitate an introduction? Or do you know anyone else who is an engineer that would be good for me to connect with? So be very specific when you're asking for a particular connection, and always ask. And people might say, I'm not sure, I need to think about it, which is fine, but I think you're much more likely to get an answer of somebody that you can talk to next when you ask at the end of every conversation. And then also end the conversation asking how you can help them too, because you really want for them to walk away feeling like it was a win-win. And most likely they're going to have some follow-up on their end when it comes to connecting you with somebody else. And if they walk away feeling gratitude, like, gosh, this is truly a valuable connection that I want to have going forward, then they're more likely to help you out. So always ask how you can help them. A lot of times they might say, I can't think of anything, but at least knowing that you opened that door and offering is the right thing to do. And then lastly, you know, you may need to follow up. You know, I'll share my own personal experience when I was unemployed. I will tell you, it can be very difficult at times. And a lot of you may have gone from a situation where people were always reaching out to you, always wanting to talk to you, and then you go to not having a job, and you're the one that's always following up, always having to knock on doors. You may have had a great conversation with somebody, and then you don't hear from them again. Please know that is not you. It's part of the process, and it's part of what you've got to go through. And you also know, you never know what other people are going through. So you may have had a great conversation with somebody, but then their life may have fallen apart a couple of days later, and they just, following up on the request from you just wasn't able to be a priority anymore. So stay positive. And practice that mental self-talk with yourself too. You are all valuable. You all have skills that you can share, and you will land a role. I promise you, you will land a role, and it's going to feel extra good when you do. So stay positive, and keep telling yourself the value that you have, because you have a lot. All right. Moving on to the interviewing. So interviewing in a virtual world, a few tips here. I know it seems like almost every interview now starts off, or at least the first several interviews are via Zoom or via online. I know I use Microsoft Teams a lot. There's Blue Jeans. There's a whole bunch of them out there. So do a tech test and have a plan B. So this has also happened to me from an HR standpoint, just happened to me last week. We had a situation where we have a search firm that actually set up a Zoom interview. While we all go into the Zoom interview and it says that somebody else is using the meeting ID. Whoops. So fortunately, we all had each other's email addresses and we're able to email each other, and then we set up an alternative Teams conference line. So make sure that you have, if you have a Zoom scheduled, make sure you have the phone number or the email of the person you're going to be speaking with as well. And you can do a quick plan B, even if it's FaceTime for that interview or conversation. Arrive a few minutes early. We all know how this goes too. I was just in a board meeting right before this, and our CEO was presenting and his computer crashed 3 times. And we actually talked about doing a tech test last night and we didn't. So believe me, I wish we would have, because it was a slow start to this board meeting this morning. But arrive a few minutes early, and these first 2 things will pay off. Look at the camera and not at the screen. This is something I need to practice. So follow my words, maybe not necessarily what I'm the best at doing. But if you're looking at the screen, it makes it look like you're looking down slightly. So talk to the camera on your computer. Be cognizant of your background. Simple backgrounds are best. So I kind of scrolled through everyone's photo when I first entered, and I noticed some of this too. The less you can have in the background, the better. Or if you can blur your background, that's also a really good solution too. I don't, because I know Microsoft Teams has that, where you can blur your background. Not sure about Zoom, but it may be something to look into, or even purchase. I know you can purchase now for not a lot of money some backgrounds, and perhaps you get one that's very simple and very clean, and just use that all the time. And then you don't need to worry about cleaning up your own space. Make sure that you are also light too. That's a big thing. You know, look at your own photo and say, can you see my face? You know, is the room bright? Angle the camera so it's at you or slightly pointed down. That is the most flattering angle. Do not have the camera below your line of eyesight, because then you're going to get that look up appearance and your chin, and you know, sometimes you know, a double chin is put there when you really don't even have one, just because of the angle of the camera. So make sure you're, you know, if you need to buy like a standing desk, I'm on one right now, so that or you know, some sort of something that props your computer up, you know, could be whatever, that props your computer up so it's at least at eyesight or above you looking down slightly. That's actually the most flattering angle. Place sticky notes around your monitor with your key points too. It's okay to look down sometimes. It's okay to take notes. That's absolutely perfectly acceptable, but you don't want that to be the majority of the time that you're speaking with somebody. So if you place the sticky notes around your computer, then that will keep you looking up, keep you looking in the direction of the camera, and no one will ever know, right? And don't read or memorize as well. You know, make sure that you have rehearsed your stories, your cars enough so that they just kind of rattle off without having to be memorized. And again, as we already talked about, remember that CAR technique, STAR technique, whichever one you use, and quantify the results as possible. And then make sure you have 3 to 4 insightful questions to ask too. This is really, really, really important. Your questions are still part of the interview process. So I had very recently too had a situation where a candidate basically asked, one of their accountabilities for the role that they were interviewing for was to grow the business and grow the sales side of the business. And one of their questions at the end was, well, gosh, you have a really aggressive growth plan. How do you expect to achieve that growth in the next couple of years? Well, that was really what we're hiring this person for. So I guess my point here is, do your research do your research and ask some really, really insightful, you can Google this too, and say, what are some of the best questions to ask, but anything about, you can even ask the person about themselves and, their favorite part about working and what are the most challenges. I'm trying to think of these things off the top of my head, but anyways, I would probably Google that, but make sure your questions are very, very insightful, and don't go beyond 3 or 4. Usually there's about 5 to 10 minutes allotted at the end for questions. Don't come with 8 to 10 questions because that's just going to take too much time. All right, and that's actually it for my segment here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the most important part is I want to hear what you guys want to hear that I didn't share today. And feel free to ask me anything about recruiting, hiring, or anything else HR.
Hi, Jenna. This is Joe. Thank you for your presentation. I actually have 3 questions. The first one is related to cover letters.
Yeah.
Do they carry weight? And if so, should we always supply a cover letter, or can you give us some guidance on when to use a cover letter and when not to use?
That's a really good question. So I will share with you that personally, I have a couple of individuals that do most of the pre-screening. Matter of fact, virtually all of it for me and any of the roles that I'm interviewing for. I will tell you that I don't put a lot of weight in cover letters. So, and I also don't hear our recruiters talk about them. I also have an internal talent acquisition manager. She's never talked about them either. So I think probably the best thing is submitting your resume, submitting your application, finding a contact within that company that can then forward your resume and some sort of endorsement for you. But with that does not need to come with a cover letter. Your resume alone is fine.
Okay, very good. And then my second question is, these are related to LinkedIn. Do you actually use LinkedIn Recruiter to go out and look for candidates, or do you actually just wait for candidates to submit their applications?
Yeah, so we do. So the recruiter that we use for a lot of our salary roles does use LinkedIn Recruiter. Yeah, so we use a bit of both. We definitely, they're the people that apply for us, but then also we do the proactive sourcing as well too.
Okay. And then my third question is, LinkedIn Recruiter or LinkedIn now has that little icon that says open to work on your photo.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? If it's turned on or turned off, do you have a preference? Does it attract you more to a person if they have that on there that says open to work?
That is a really, really good question. I've actually kind of been wondering that myself. So since most of the pre-screening is done by our 2 recruiters, I don't know their perception on that, but mine personally, if I was doing the recruiting and the sourcing, that would have no bearing to me. I would be interested in both candidates that have that on their photo and the ones that don't. And it goes back to my point of, be confident in where you are today in life, and you're in transition and you've got a lot of skills to offer, and you are on to a new chapter, and hey, I am ready to work. So, so to me, I if somebody has that on, I think it shows confidence that they're willing to tell the world, hey, I am here, available, and I've got a lot of skills to offer you.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question.
Yeah, and this is Mike Medina. I would add to that, when I originally started looking, I had the little green circle around my photo, and I did some research and spoke to a number of people, and it seemed like the majority of people were leaning against having that on there, that it felt like it smelled a little bit of desperation. And I think that kind of speaks back to Jenna's point about being confident, that there are ways to make sure that you are, you're including either in transition, or there are ways within either your profile summary or within your experience that you can communicate that you are looking for a job and not necessarily have it, kind of front and center around your photo. That really,
Yeah.
that's at least, because originally when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, that's great. And I kind of threw it on there, really not thinking it through very much. And then as I started thinking it through and spoke to a number of people, I shied away from it and I took it off.
Great insight, Mike. Thank you.
Hi, Jenna. My name is Stuart Cox. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I am blessed with the, when you do the Google search, if you all looking for a little mini haha this afternoon, go out and Google Stuart Cox in Louisville, Kentucky, spelling Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, and multiple pages of boyfriend arrested for murder of Oklahoma woman, suspect tells police he has no memory. Back in March and April of 2016, there was a murder here in Louisville. And believe it or not, there is another Stuart Cox in Louisville, Kentucky, of the same name. So I'm not sure. I'd Googled before and seen that, but now that you mentioned that, it's like you got to wonder sometimes with the search engines and the HR systems that are out there. Is that, the first thing that comes up when I Google, of course, unfortunately, is my proper LinkedIn profile, but then everything else for pages after that is this other incident. So just curious if we run into that. And
oh goodness, yeah, and
it's advantageous to have a name like mine.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and we absolutely know that there are people that have the same name. So I'm guessing that maybe the pictures on your picture on your LinkedIn profile doesn't look like the picture of the person that was arrested. But regardless, if we had any question, we would not throw an applicant out. We have background checks, and I think most companies do. They go through background checks. If we had any sort of suspicion that there was truth to that being you, we would run just a background check a little earlier than we would maybe waiting until an offer was made. But yeah, so very interesting that those tie up. But
yeah,
and I think for me, I'm more talking like the Facebooks and if there's YouTube videos you have out there and things of that nature.
Any other questions?
Yes, this is Brennan. Jenna, thanks for being with us here. So my question is around, if you kind of touched on it before about the, if you don't have a connection at a place that you apply to, what would you suggest? And I've kind of gotten different stories back and forth with, recruiters like yourself. Would you suggest reaching out, or if you can find who the recruiter is within HR, would you reach out to them, leave a message? Would you do something like that? Because it seems like on one hand, some recruiters get frustrated with that. Others appreciate it. And it's really just kind of hard to tell. And I just feel like it's kind of a crapshoot on what to do. I always side with just do it, because if I'm one of hundreds and hundreds, I got nothing to lose at this point anyway. So, but you want to.
I agree with you on that as well too. It does not hurt to reach out. You can usually figure out who the recruiter is, or somebody in HR, or maybe even somebody that's in the department of the area that you are applying for. And the worst that could happen is they don't see your message, they don't read it, or they don't reply, right? But okay, no harm, no foul. But then what can happen is, they could say, sure, let me take a look at your resume. Let me put yours at the top of the pile, or hey, let me check in on it. So I would absolutely say reach out, send that email. As long as you're not hounding about it, I wouldn't see why that would annoy a recruiter. That it shouldn't. That's their job, is to find the best candidate. And somebody just think that they applied.
Yeah, Jenna,
absolutely, yes.
If I might just add to that too, sometimes, a lot of the problems these days are the applicant tracking systems, and just getting your resume through the applicant tracking system is a big challenge. And that personal note might just get your resume through the ATS.
Yeah, yep. That's a great point. Very true. I mean, I know me personally, when I was in transition, I reached out to some people, somebody at Disney. I love Disney. And so I reached out and I heard back, and that's still a connection today. And I ended up meeting that person when I went to Disney, was all because of a kind of a blind LinkedIn message that I sent him. So that number one. And number two, I can tell you this has happened to me a couple of weeks ago. Somebody reached out and said they applied for one of our roles, and I saw the message on LinkedIn and was able to then forward his resume then to, or make sure that he was seen by our recruiter. So it does happen. I will tell you too that being in HR, it's crazy how many direct LinkedIn messages I get. I think I actually tried to quantify it one time, and I think between like 8 and noon, I got like 6 direct messages. So that's what, about 10 to 12 a day. And so it's a lot. It's almost like I would need a second, somebody just to manage responding and following up to those. Don't take offense if somebody doesn't, and maybe even send them one more message. So if you send a message and they don't read it, or they read it and didn't reply, I think sending one more time is appropriate too. Maybe after 2, you don't send another message, but sometimes also people will read something and mean to get back to it, and they get distracted, or a call or something like that.
Hi, Jenna, this is Terry. Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Absolutely.
It's really helpful. Quick question. Some of us have been the bridesmaid, or we weren't selected, we get the infamous,
Yeah.
Thank you for applying. Is there any way or any tip for getting some feedback on what we could do differently? It's been a challenge from my perspective, getting to the core of maybe the reason why you may not have been selected. I don't know if it's a legal thing, or from your perspective, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I completely, so first of all, I would absolutely ask for the feedback if you get the decline. You may not get a lot of detail, because if you think about it from the employer standpoint, there's not a ton in it for the employer to give you a whole lot of feedback. And in fact, it's more of a risk if something is said incorrectly, or maybe not interpreted or taken the right way. So that's usually why a whole lot of feedback isn't given, but that doesn't mean you can't still ask and also probe too. So you can ask, and maybe asking a few more specific questions may elicit an answer over what feedback do you have for me, or what could have I done better. That's a very broad question. But perhaps you could say something like, what additional skills could have I had? I'm trying to think, or what additional skill or skills would have made me a more viable candidate? Or what skill or behavior did I not display that others did that are moving forward in the process? Something to that nature. Or if you can come up with another very specific question, like if you knew it was something that they were looking for, you could ask them specifically, did I have this specific skill that you were looking for? Or you can even go the more gentle route too, just about your interviewing skills. As I continue to move forward, is there anything I could have done better on my Zoom, on the Zoom conversation? Because maybe it came down to that. Yeah, so I would definitely still seek feedback, and I think it's great. It shows that, and you can take that and apply it to new ones, new interviews, but sometimes it is difficult.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question.
I had a question, Jenna, if you don't mind, just real quick.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the photos on the LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Not really about the photo, but I was just curious, is there, and I should just ask, what's your perspective? I had heard from companies in the past when they were looking for individuals that many times, and maybe why some people may have used or for their profile not adding the fact that they were between jobs, because some companies had mentioned that they really don't focus on hiring people in transition. They focus more on people who were in a already in a position. I was just curious. I mean, is that a, let's just say, preference from the recruiter's perspective, or have you seen encountered that in the past, or what's your feeling about that?
You know, I have not. I can only go on our company and what we're doing. We right now are working with a top search firm for a chief growth officer role. And I will tell you that both myself and our recruiting practices and their recruiting practices, it does not matter if the person's in transition or if they are currently employed. In fact, we've interviewed more candidates that are in transition than we have that are currently employed. Because what we are looking for and what's most important to us is skills and abilities, not whether they're currently working during the day or not. And it goes back to the fact that we understand the world that we are living in today. And it is very much of people, a lot of people are in transition for a lot of different reasons. So I have not heard of anyone.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they're not out there. I'm sure there are. There's millions of companies, but that won't hire somebody if they're in transition. I think they're really losing out. That's a company loss, and quite frankly, I'm guessing it's probably a company you might not want to consider if they're that black and white about their candidates they speak with.
No, I appreciate that. I feel the same way. I think a lot of companies, if they are taking that type of position, that they are losing out on some quality people. So thank you.
Absolutely, I agree. They're cutting out a lot of really talented folks out there.
Any other questions before?
I do. Jen, I have a question about ageism.
Yes.
Just observing our students come through, and it seems as if those who are more experienced and have a few more miles on them than others tend to take longer to land a position. And then the last month or so, I can't remember if it was on CBS or what news outlet, there was an article or a segment about, especially right now because of the pandemic, the Gen Xers, which are in their 50s on up. So they're in that weird stage of life where they're not quite ready for retirement, but yet they're more expensive, quote unquote, more expensive for a company. And so oftentimes the millennials are now being more looked at. And so the Gen Xers are just getting lost, like we always are. We're the last generation. So do you have any advice for the Gen Xers who are in their 50s, not ready for retirement, and still have yet to offer a lot to offer in their careers?
Yeah, the way that I look at it is, that's a lot of times the population with a ton of experience, a ton of knowledge, and is highly, highly valuable. Of course, it is illegal for a company to discriminate based upon age, the way somebody looks, etc. If there's any company that you believe may be doing that, I'm not sure how you know that, but then that's not a company you want to work for at all. You want to run away from that company. You have much higher value than anyone who's going to judge someone based upon their age. But I have to tell you that I'm finding that those are the richest resumes just because they have so much experience and so much to draw on. So going back to have confidence in that, you're going to have a lot of stories to be able to tell and a lot of value to bring to an organization. One thing to look at too, if you're finding that, going to your statement of maybe cost maybe a little bit more expensive just because you've been in the workforce longer, perhaps we're at more of a senior level role or more of an executive type role. Really look at companies that are, if you're having a hard time finding the level role that you want or the compensation that you're desiring, see if you can take a little bit less, but look for companies that are really keen and focus on promoting internally. So ask them those sort of questions. What is your internal promotion rate? How frequently do you consider internal candidates for promotions? What percent of your people were promoted within the last year, the last 3 years? Because if you get a company that promotes internally, you might be able to take more you know, a role that maybe doesn't compensate or is at the level you want, but if you know you can get in there and prove your skills, you could be promoted within a year and be making the same amount or more than maybe you were before. So look at it as a long-term play versus short-term.
Jenna, I have a question. This is David Young from Columbus, Ohio, former BPG student. I noticed you took his class back in March 2018, so congratulations. Thank you for coming back to speak on the subject of recruitment. I want to switch gear a little bit on the aspect of training and certification, particular to the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt that you and I and many of us here on this call have taken and passed the exam. How has it helped you in your career in HR? I noticed you worked for Macy for 2 decades, congratulations. And then you switched gear, starting your own business into marketing, and then now joining a different company. So how has this Lean Six Sigma Black Belt helped you in your human resource professions to help your career to go further?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. You know, what I found with the Lean Six Sigma is that it focuses on process improvement, and there are processes all over companies. So I was able to share examples of, you know, what I learned in the interview process. I can't say, you know, being in HR, I'm maybe a little bit more of a stretch when it comes to being, that's really important for an HR leader to have a Black Belt Six Sigma. I'm guessing a lot of you, that's much more, maybe more relevant to your particular career industry. But I would say that, you know, definitely find ways to be able to talk about that in the interview. Have an example of what you learned in the class and how you can apply it to the new role going forward. And try to find a way to integrate that into the interview, because it shows, you know, that class is very rigorous. It shows you have continuous learning, and then you're interested in further developing yourself, which is a really important skill to have for virtually every single role. You know, it shows that, you know, you've got the drive and, you know, to be able to complete and get a certification of that nature. So right now, you know, I do work in the manufacturing environment, and we use a lot of like lean processes. So it has helped me because as they're talking through that, I feel I'm able to relate and able to understand that. Yeah, so it's definitely been a plus for me from an understanding standpoint and just a process improvement overall.
Thank you, Jenna. The reason I asked, a lot of job seekers come across, they like to take certification just for the sake to adding more stuff on their resume, which is not very relevant, even for things that's not applied to their professions. In human resource, for example, you can be SPHR, you know, certified human resource professional at SHRM. So I'm involved in a couple of SHRM chapters throughout the city in Ohio. And they told me a lot of professional people who are gainfully employed, not job seekers, gainfully employed, like to take a lot of certification that's not even relevant to their career development. And that kind of brings the concerns. Same applies to job seeker. Yes, for us, we need to grow. We need to improve our skill sets, and especially for Task Force Pulse, Breakthrough Performance Group is a training provider. Their goal is to train us to increase our knowledge, but we got to be relevant. It's up to us to be relevant for the certification credential that we're pursuing that will be applicable and relevant to our next career, not something out of the blue. I want to get certified in IT, but never working IT. So that's the reason I bring it up. I've seen a lot of that being done for job seeker and working professionals too, taking certification they should not be doing. So it's a problem, especially now.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. And, you know, and I would always take it back to, you know, your experiences are going to be more relevant when it comes to looking for a job and on the job than probably any certification. And I almost hate to say this, but almost any education that you have. And I'm not saying that, you know, I highly believe in education, but I really feel, especially the longer in the workforce, those experiences are what are going to be the richest and the ones that you can apply as you move forward in your career.
What Jenna just said, I think experience is key. I think the training, and when you're talking about different industries, I mean, I had the same issue when I got my black belt in 2010. Okay, I was still interviewing for marketing director positions and so forth. And anytime I went into an interview, they're like, "Why in the heck did you get a Six Sigma certification?" Right? And I kind of went through my story about my aha moment. to Jenna's point about everything we do is a process. And if we can affect the process instead of having to wait until afterwards and be reactionary versus proactive, can we eliminate a lot of those issues or understand our process and streamline the process and remove a lot of those inefficiencies or wastes, as we say, out of the process. And from that perspective, I think it applies to almost any industry, and it does. And what we're seeing now is exactly that, to where these methodologies really resonate in almost any industry. So again, my background in marketing, I obviously market research and so forth, how to looking at our timelines, let alone the type of questions we develop and which are more effective and so forth. But the other side of that was product platform development and stage gate type of programs, and how long it's taking us to go from concept to launch, and why it's taking us so long, and how long does it take us to get signatures, and how do we alleviate all those issues out of the system. I mean, that's where, for me, so when I lived it, and then when I took the class, I'm like, holy crap, okay, this really makes resonated with me for that reason. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here. But really, that's why I think it does apply.
Yeah.
I have a question concerning resumes and what experience you present. I currently show my work history since I've been in Ohio, like 2006 to 2020. However, I have about 30 years of experience. Should I be showing all of that, or just like the last 14 years?
Yeah, I think the last 14 to 15 years is relevant, is most important. I would not show 30 years and have a resume that goes on 5 pages or so. I would try to keep your resume to 2 pages if you can. 3 is probably fine, but I would think maybe 2 is the sweet spot.
Okay. And
Yeah.
the same thing with LinkedIn. Should I not show that experience on LinkedIn? Just show the last
I
14
think
years?
I would just go back the last 15 years.
Okay. Thank you very much.
There's no right or wrong answer here. You could certainly show all of it, but I think you're going to grab the attention of people who are going to read that the first 15 years, and then after that,
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Hey,
And
hi,
by the
Jenna.
way, talking about ageism, I applied for a company where the latest year they would allow you to put down for your resume, because it was a drop-down menu, was 2005. So I don't know if I'm saying what they are, but it's definitely out there. I've also noticed in reading different companies' EEO comments that some of them list age and some of them do not.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So a company doesn't list age there, then I do not recommend applying for that company. And the other one on the application, though, if you say the drop downs only go to 2005, the only thing is they might say, we just want your last 15 years of experience. So that might not necessarily be a discrimination thing.
Well, the irony of this, it was the intent of this drop down was what was the year that you graduated from college?
Oh, what?
And it was something that you had to answer there. If you left it blank, it wouldn't allow you to proceed.
Oh, but that's crazy.
Yes.
Did you reach out to the recruiter and let them know that?
No, I did not, but I did get a response back because I put down 2005 with the intention of explaining it at an interview if I was given the opportunity. And I received the message back that I didn't meet the minimum requirements, which was not true.
Right.
Hey, Jenna, this is Stu Cox again. Back to this whole breadth of experience piece. Paul and Tonsils are real familiar with my experience. I've done consulting the last 10 years in addition to full-time permanent work I've been involved with, both in the food service industry and in healthcare. I've spent 30 years in the Yum Brands in the food service industry with suppliers and a broad experience on the technical and engineering side. The last 5 years, I actually took a little break, deviated from that, and spent 5 years in healthcare. I'm very passionate and interested in continuing to work in the healthcare industry, but I'm realistic also. I've got a lot of vested experience and something to offer in the food service industry. Thus, the issue I've got 30 years of, this supply chain and food service experience and 5 years of healthcare in the most recent time frame. So I have two different resumes where I kind of have spread it out further. It's still on 2 pages, but it covers a little more detail about the stuff further back. But any advice in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, advice in terms of?
Well, again, the resume, I guess I picked to send as if I'm doing healthcare, I'll do the one that has a lot of the older stuff truncated. It mentions it, but that mentions the employer, but it doesn't have any of the details there. I kind of just summarized some of the employers from the past, but
yeah, I mean, I am absolutely in agreement that to tailor your resume to the position you're applying for. So every job that you apply for, you should really, I know this takes a lot of time, but if it's something you really want, absolutely tailor your resume and give the experiences that are most relevant to that role, and maybe have your headline even different as well too.
Right.
Yeah,
the headline
did that answer your question? But it's fine to truncate your experiences if they're not quite as relevant.
Yeah, it gets back to when you do. I noticed it becomes challenging when you do provide the resume with the longer experience. This ageism question continues to come up, and John's, I think, hit on the points that there's. I think all of us, probably many of us on this call, have encountered this over the last year, particularly. Because just the number of folks that are in the mix right now available for work. And I actually have an LLC set up, and I do consulting. I'm available to do consulting in that. So that's one thing I've done to open up my alternatives and have available options. And I'm starting to hear now that larger companies are starting to be consider spending on the discretionary spending on consulting and resources that way, but there's still constraints around COVID that I hear about too, but it is another option.
Yeah.
Jenna, this is Paul Warmus. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation today. But you're in HR. I was in HR for 25 years. And during that time, I also headed up process improvement in the company, which is kind of an oddball. Some people view that as an oddball combination. Is your company engaged in Lean Six Sigma? And have you seen you've been able to apply, other than in HR, your knowledge and skills of Lean Six Sigma to the operation of the company?
Yeah, we do have lean processes, which I know are different than Lean Six Sigma. So the company that I am with right now, I have not used it as much outside of HR. I've used it more for process improvement within human resources, but there's a lot of companies that do use Lean Six Sigma. So I think if I would have chosen another company to work with, then the answer would have been different. But
the thing I found, and this is part of my teaching too, is that a lot of success with Lean Six Sigma is really people related. How well the company communicates, managing change. Continuous improvement means continuous change. Hiring the right people that fit the environment, team building, utilizing the team-based methodologies. So that's where your role can be very important. Having had this knowledge of Lean Six Sigma and being an HR person and having that influence as well.
That's a great point, Paul. Really great point. Yeah, I'm still very, very, very proud of the certification and what I learned. And you're right. Everything comes back to people, right? And having yeah. So great point.
So great job today.
1 o'clock-ish mark. Again, I don't want to I mean, if you have some extra time, Jen, I'm more than happy to have you on here. I want to be sensitive to your time and to others as well. So that's why.
Yeah, I can keep going. I did have a 1 o'clock call, but I already texted her and said that I'm on a call, and I'll let her know when I'm finished. I think we're good to go a couple more minutes if.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we wrap it up here?
Jenna,
What?
just one other question real quick, and it's related to salary negotiation. I'm finding that companies want to know up front, even before they interview you.
Yeah.
The first question on the call is what your salary requirements are. How do you navigate through that? And then when it actually comes down to the negotiations, whoever puts the first number out there, it's kind of like the starting point. So I try to get the range from the company and so on, and some will provide that and then some won't.
Yeah.
So any advice?
I would, when they ask, if they come right out of the gate and ask for your salary range, I would try to turn it back and ask them, would you be willing to share with me what the salary range is for this? Or say something like, well, I've got some flexibility there. Would you be willing to share what the range is? Or even, I would like to learn a little bit more about the role and the value of the role. Before I'm able to share a salad number, which is completely fair. So I think if they're asking you that very early, you probably don't know enough about the position to be able to say, well, gosh, I would take this role, because you might take one role for a salary, but then not take another one for that same salary based upon the other factors. I mean, there's things like, can you work remotely? What is the benefits package? Of course, what is there equity that you get? I mean, there's a lot of factors when it comes into choosing if you're going to accept a job or not. So I would try to hold off on providing a number as long as you can, but not too long. You also don't want to seem like you're not flexible and not willing to, work with them on that. And giving a range is